nice to go to an actual briefing room where you can talk with journalists or just with the colleagues just to get the mood. But I think everyone is shocked, or too shocked. I think they're just looking on Twitter. I think they're. I learned the econ Twitter, so I think like the Economist on Twitter. I think they are shocked just by the whole, just like how big the issue is, just the whole argument and everything. And then I think now that's one line of just like, okay, like where will we be very soon when ECB cannot do or might not be able to do what they wanted to do. And then I think, of course, the Greens and others are pushing, okay, now we need more better coordination in fiscal policy. Now we just like see how risky it was to only depend or like to only rely on the ECB. And then I think, of course, what's probably more relevant for our discussion here and what I heard as well is, of course, this big line of just like, okay, if Bundesverfassungsgericht says European Court of Justice, we don't accept what you do. I mean, that's great for folks in Warsaw and in Budapest and I don't know, maybe in Valletta or just like whoever feels that it would be good to challenge the European Court of Justice. So I think that's the other strain or like the more direct messages that I have received by some of the people from, I don't know, networks of European judges and everything who were just like, oh my God, just like, have you seen that? And will you push the narrative? But I think that's also on parts of the German Twitter, I think that was stressed, and also the Commission spokesperson was asked about it as well.
Well, one direct link and impact is the fact that this is very much a Eurozone issue.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes it adds another argument to countries that are not in the Eurozone, like Poland and Hungary, who would say that we have to rely on our own budgets and then on the EU budget, when it will kick in January, if there is agreement. While the Eurozone rescue mechanism and the pandemics program and so on will take a lot of time to figure out.
Yeah. No, I think, of course, it made, I think it's like it doesn't make anything easier. It's much more complicated. People, of course, have to read and study. I mean, I think right now, that's what the spokesperson have all said, just like, oh, we have to study it in detail, blah, blah, blah. We can't tell you more. But yeah, it's, and I think, of course, it was this, I mean, of course, I read the stories in my newspaper and the other German newspaper, and I think that was not expected to have such a kind of revolutionary approach. I think it was like people thought, okay, there will be some critical, but not to such an extent. But
okay,
yeah, that's
thanks.
where we are.
So I will ask you about that.
In the beginning, or?
Well, I think at the beginning it would drive us too much into it.
Yeah.
Way. So let's start in Poland. With Poland, one new thing that I added, and I will ask you, is about this transcontinental divide and numbers of COVID infections. So the fact that Central Eastern Europe has a substantially low numbers, and whether that is recognized. And we will have a chart from Financial Times of last week. But otherwise, we follow the structure.
Okay, sounds good.
So we are now live on YouTube, but not live in Zoom.
Yes.
So we are just waiting for 3 minutes, and then we will invite all the viewers in Zoom.
Please, to our speakers, put your mobile phones on silent.
Done.
Okay.
Very good point.
And we can
and I see Wojciech Szacki is also here, so welcome once again.
Hello. Yes. Hi, Wojciech.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for doing it in partnership. Before you joined us, we briefly discussed the reaction in Brussels to decision of German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe. And that has an impact on about the ECB. Actually, Matthias, two questions. One will be what are the reactions and what it means for ECB.
Ooh,
well, what it means in one sentence. It's what was it about. Actually, we cannot just say.
Okay.
Just one sentence. What was it was about the quantified easing mechanism, but the implications will be on the new instrument on the pandemics program.
Okay.
I mean, we cannot do more than 30 seconds about what it is about, but then the mood and the
usually I'm so happy that I don't have to write about all the economic stuff. But
fully understand.
Yeah.
Wojciech, can I ask you the first sentence using your Twitter the first question, sorry, that you put on your Twitter account like 5 days before the D-Day, and we still don't know about what's going on. Is it something that you did also this morning?
No, not really. I did it today, but I did it for several days. So it's okay if you start with this.
So we will start in 1 minute.
So I'm going to mute myself, have a great discussion and have fun with this difficult topic.
Thank you. Okay, I'll let everyone in.
Okay, I think we can start. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. My name is Milan Nič. I'm the head of program for Central and Eastern Europe and Russia at the German Council on Foreign Relations, which is also known as DGAP and is based in Berlin. This is a joint online video discussion with Polityka Insight, leading Polish political consultancy and think tank, which is part of Polityka magazine, one of the largest weeklies in Poland. In the next almost 60 minutes, we are going to talk about corona power politics in Poland and Hungary. And specifically, we will discuss possible scenarios ahead in Warsaw on the presidential elections that are still supposed to take place this Sunday, 10th of May. We will also assess the initial period of Hungarian Prime Minister's Orbán rule by decrees in Budapest after some 4 or 5 weeks, and reactions to these measures across Europe so far, and also implications for European politics. It is my honor to introduce you our distinguished speakers in this online discussion. It's Wojciech Szacki, head of political desk at Polish think tank Polityka Insight. Hello. Zsuzsanna Vegh, Hungarian researcher and lecturer at the European University Viadrina at smaller Frankfurt on the Oder River at the German-Polish border.
Thank you.
Hello, Zsuzsanna. And Zsuzsanna is also associate researcher at the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR. And last but not least is with us Matthias Kolb, correspondent for EU and NATO at Süddeutsche Zeitung based in Brussels.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation.
You can also watch us on YouTube live channel. I'm mentioning this because we are overbooked in this Zoom discussion. So you should see an icon on the right-hand corner that you can share with your friends or those who couldn't register. And our discussion will proceed in 2 parts. In the first one, we are going to do a little bit talk show style interviews with the speakers, and thereafter 20-25 minutes, I will open up our discussion for you, our participants at Zoom platform, to ask your questions or share your thoughts. You can do it also via chat. Now, let me introduce you my colleague Marina Sonceva and invite her to share with us some housekeeping information.
Hello, also from my side. First of all, I invite you to mute all your microphones. We will put you on mute automatically. To unmute yourself, please use the microphone button in the left corner of your screen, or use the space button. You may also switch between the gallery view or speaker view in the right corner of your screen. We recommend you to use the speaker view during the panel discussion, or a gallery view during the Q&A session. And we are encouraging you to write all your questions to the chat during the online discussion. And at this point, I'd like also to notify you. Yeah,
we have too many people who are not.
We will provide the recording afterwards to everyone who could not join us now, and we are also broadcasting on YouTube. Please feel free to share the YouTube link with your colleagues and friends who would like to tune in. And with this, I would like to come back to Milan.
Thank you, Marina. So let me start with the pandemics. The numbers of infected by coronavirus in both countries, but the whole region of Central Eastern Europe have been very low in the European terms. This is an interesting transcontinental divide, and we will come back to it during our discussion looking at the numbers. What makes Poland and Hungary special is that there is a lot of attention now to what has happened in the political sphere. It's rather their power politics of their leaders that has been going beyond the limits that also makes them special within the region of Central Eastern Europe. Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Chairman Jarosław Kaczynski have been taking advantage of this unprecedented health crisis to consolidate their power. And it is happening, I believe, at a very high cost for their country's position in the European Union. This is something that we will discuss in the next hour. But before that, let me start with a question to Warsaw, as this drama is taking place now in Poland ahead of something unprecedented. There are supposed to be presidential elections this Sunday, and still many things are unknown. Wojtek, you've been starting your days on Twitter with a message. There are so and so now 5 days left until the presidential elections, and we are still in the dark about how it will take place, when it will take place. So what do we know now, 5 days ahead of 10th of May? You need to unmute yourself.
We know a little bit more now. We know almost for sure that the Senate, which is controlled by the opposition, will veto the law on the postal voting that was adopted a month ago by the Sejm. It will happen tomorrow on the 6th of May in the evening, so that the Sejm has as little time as possible. So the final voting will take place in the evening, or perhaps even at night, but before the midnight, because it's the last possible day to proceed in the Senate. And in normal circumstances, this veto would be overridden by the Sejm, by the ruling coalition on the 7th of May. This law enables to organize postal voting and only postal voting on the 10th of May, but the ruling coalition would have a chance to postpone the election until the 23rd of May. This would need a cooperation between the Prime Minister and the Marshal of the Sejm. But yes, the ruling party would have a chance to switch the elections, the presidential election, to the 23rd of May. It would take place on Saturday, and this would be the last possible date of the election under this law on postal voting. What we don't know yet is whether the ruling coalition has the majority in the Sejm. When we go back to the election day, the parliamentary election day in October, PiS, together with its two junior coalition partners, gained 235 MPs in the Sejm, which is 5 above the threshold of majority. But Jarosław Gowin and some of his colleagues from his party agreement disagree with Jarosław Kaczyński over the issue of postal voting. And we don't know whether Jarosław Kaczyński managed to crush Gowin's party or talk some MPs from other parliamentary groupings into supporting the law. So this voting is likely to take place on the 7th of May in the Sejm, and no one really knows for sure whether PiS will win this voting. And also the opposition doesn't know that. It might come down to 1 or 2 votes. PiS needs 231 votes. And if, for example, 5 MPs from Porozumienie, from Gowin's party, vote together with the opposition, this law goes to trash, and we don't know where we are because there are no rules, no possible dates of the election, and no legal framework to organize the election.
Wojciech, Poland is the 5th largest EU member. Would you say that it's now on the verge of constitutional crisis or political chaos? Or what is likely to happen even with these presidential elections? Postal vote or postponement? What are your assessment as political analyst?
Well, if PiS wins this voting on the 7th of May, we will likely have to have presidential election, postal presidential election carried out by Polish Post and one of the ministries which is governed by Jacek Sasin, the Deputy Prime Minister. And this raises serious doubts whether this election will be in any way normal, democratic, and so on and so on. But it will be possible for the it will be possible for the ruling camp to organize this voting.
But how much is prepared? Poland has 30 million eligible voters. If you do it by post, plus I think also Poles who live in other countries are eligible to vote through the embassies. This is a huge logistical operation. How to do it so that at least to keep a claim that this vote will be well done, democratic and legitimate?
Well, I don't think it's possible, but the representatives of PiS, ministers and political leaders claim that it's possible to organize it on the 17th or the 23rd of May. And perhaps they will do it. There will be lots of mistakes, there will be lots of protests, but they are determined to do so. But they will have to first to win this voting on the 7th of May. Otherwise,
we have to wait for Thursday evening, and then we'll see what happens next.
Yes. And if PiS loses this voting, there are lots of options on the table, from the fall of the government and early parliamentary election to serious constitutional crisis or to declaring state of emergency, which would mean postponing of the presidential election.
Thank you, Wojciech. We'll go to Brussels, to Matthias. To me, as somebody who has been following politics in Central and Eastern Europe for 3 decades, this is something unprecedented what is happening now in Poland. So we have an absolutely unique sort of event that is coming, which is unknown, not well organized. At least in the last 15 years that our countries have been in the EU, this has not happened, as the pandemics has not happened. But what would you say in terms of attention in Brussels, Matthias? Has this Polish drama attracted some attention in the media, from the officials in European institutions?
I think there is a lot of attention being paid to what's happening in Poland. I think also, at least what we in Germany often call the Qualitätszeitungen. I think Frankfurter Allgemeine writes a lot about what's happening in Poland, about the muscle law. We at Süddeutsche write a lot. Der Spiegel, we try to push the issue and just report about what's happening. But I think, of course, from a media perspective, it's always challenging if there are these developments that have been going on for years and years. I think sometimes it's difficult to convince our editors and then the readers or the viewers that just hey, it's important to pay attention again to what's happening in Poland or in Hungary, because I think for years, of course, they have heard that things are not going in the right direction. For them, nothing changed so much. So that's sometimes challenging. But I think here in Brussels, there are a lot of members of parliament who pay a lot of attention to what's happening in Poland. There are a lot of journalists here. Brussels, in normal times, but also virtually, is one of these places where, there's a pan-European public. Every day we can ask questions, and the Polish journalists are asking questions about that all the time, and the Germans do, and the Dutch and the Swedish. So I think there's a constant debate about what's happening. But of course, it's also fair to say that I think Commissioner Jourova, who is handling that portfolio in the lead, I think she is well liked. I think people don't question her integrity. People don't question that she really cares about that issue. But at the same time, I think here in Brussels, there's also the sense that the infringement procedure that was started last week about the muscle law, it came too late. It could have started weeks ago, and people have been pushing and calling for that. They called on Ursula von der Leyen to do that. They called on Jourova herself, a lot of open letters, and that's of course something where people have questions about it. The explanation is always we had to do it properly. We had to go to the legal services. They have to check and do all the stuff and blah, blah, blah. But I think there is a certain mood in Brussels that Ursula von der Leyen is new. She wants to do a restart. She needs the polls for the Green Deal, for a lot of other issues that are important. So maybe she didn't want to step on the toes of Mr. Kaczynski too early. So I think it's hard to prove that. It's hard to prove that, but it's just something that's always there. And last point is, I think also that with Franz Timmermans, who pushed the issue very hard, there is a certain sense in the Commission that he just burned all the bridges and it didn't work. So maybe it's better now to try to have an approach based on dialogue, common sense, that kind of stuff.
And we are also discussing something which has not happened yet. This is a pretext to presidential elections that we don't know when and at what conditions are happening, but first they have to happen. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. I just watched the press conference from last week again to prepare for this event. And I think all that Jourova can say is just that we will watch it very closely. The Polish authorities have to guarantee that it's a fair and free election. So she can just call on the authorities and she can say, I, as a Polish citizen, I would be very concerned about that. I would see candidates campaigning. I would have the possibility to inform myself. And she's very concerned about that. But I think so far, there's nothing more she can do. She can use the bully pulpit and try to raise awareness, but I think that's a little bit where her hands are tied at the moment.
And the big decision and big discussion in Germany, and it's all over the media, is a decision by German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe today at 10 o'clock in the morning, and decided on the quantitative easing of European Central Bank. That has a huge impact on the agreed rescue mechanism or pandemics program at the last summit. What's the mood in Brussels about this decision?
it's a little bit hard to say because now in Brussels also everything is virtually. So I think in normal days it would be, I could give a better answer just by sensing the mood of just like all the journalists gathering ahead of the midday briefing and just like being excited and I think in this case also a little bit shocked and anxious, just because I think it can really be called a revolution. The German Constitutional Court has said that that is unconstitutional, that the German government has to find a way to make that more in a more legal way within 3 months. This program would have to stop. I have to say I'm not kind of like a business correspondent, not exactly what I write about, but I think the implications are huge on how the whole pandemic rescue plan is about to work, where the ECB has played a crucial role. And I think, of course, now there are a lot of members of parliament and experts who say, okay, that's the price the European governments or the Eurozone governments have to pay because they've only relied on the ECB to kind of like be the one with the firepower and to take out the bazooka and solve some problems. So I think that will be very challenging. And what I heard also, or like I received a number of messages by people who are concerned about rule of law, people who are active in their network of European justices, and they have said just like, oh my God, just like if I was Viktor Orban or Mr. Kaczynski, I would be happy. I mean, the German Constitutional Court is just like is really challenging the European Court of Justice, just like, and that's something they don't like. So they say that's not okay. We will not accept it. So I think there's also a big fear that this could have side effects way beyond the economic sphere by opening another door for certain parties or government to say like, hey, the European Court of Justice does a ruling that I don't like, I will not accept it, and now I have another explanation or another reason I could twist and use for not accepting it.
Plus, these days, as a result, there will be less attention on other issues.
Exactly.
We switch to Hungary, and Zsuzsa, let me start by asking you if you have any brief comment on what's happening in Poland or what we have discussed before so far.
Well, I think if you look at it from the Hungarian government's perspective, then I think two small comments would be due. One is that, of course, from a Hungarian governmental perspective, it would be beneficial for the relations if Andrzej Duda could maintain his position as president and if things went ahead smoothly. At the same time, if we think following the logic of the Hungarian government as it was put down in the so-called empowerment law or the law on protection against coronavirus adopted on the 30th of March, holding elections in such times is particularly curious. So you probably know that in this framework of the empowerment law, the Hungarian government suspended by-elections for the duration of the state of danger. So if we just follow this logic, then the Hungarian government would not comment the Polish initiative to push ahead with the elections. Of course, the Hungarian government will not comment on that.
Fidesz government headed by Viktor Orban has been in power for 10 years. In fact, there was a 10th anniversary recently of Fidesz winning the elections in 2010. And most of the time Fidesz has enjoyed constitutional majority in the parliament, and it has enacted new constitution and so on and so on. Peace in Poland came to power in 2015, and as we heard now, it's not even certain about whether it has simple majority in the parliament over this postal voting law. Using this super position, Prime Minister Orban pushed through parliament dominated by Fidesz this law that empowered him to rule by decrees on the 30th of March. These extra powers arguably can be used also for more than just health-related issues. What is the track record so far? I know that you have written an analytical paper looking at the first 4 weeks. So what have you found out?
Yes, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that this empowerment law, at least in my view, is not really a turning point. I see it much more like a next step in what is becoming an increasingly illiberal and authoritarian style of governance in Hungary. When it comes to the track record of the first month by now, I think, again, we need to consider two things. One thing is that you rightly said that the empowerment law is granting Prime Minister Orban the right to rule by, govern by decree, to amend, suspend existing legislation as long as it is argued to be in the interest of resolving the crisis. So on the one hand, we should look at the track record of the decrees. On the other hand, it is true that the parliament continues to be in session. Therefore, we need to also see what is happening there. So when it comes to the decrees, I think the record of the first month is actually quite worrisome in some regards. Some decrees have been passed violating, infringing upon data protection rights, which are not necessarily in line with GDPR itself. Also, some measures have been taken just very recently to limit access to public information, prolonging the response period in which public institutions need to answer these requests.
Sorry, let me jump in here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't hear you, Milan.
How about here now?
Nice.
Sorry. Let me jump there. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have a question about narratives. Yes. So as in the Polish case, there is a huge clash about what's happening in terms of what the ruling camp says about the presidential elections and the postal vote. They have one narrative, and then there is an opposition and there is independent media. In Poland, you can talk about the media market that is still pluralistic. You can't talk about pluralistic media market in Hungary, which is dominated by various. Or you can explain to us why there is only one television and small outlets. So is there one dominating narrative on what's going on by the governing party and nothing else, or the other narratives have a chance to be heard?
To narratives, what appears in the public, when it comes to narratives, what appears in the public media, which is under governmental control, is the usual frame of a fight against an enemy. In this case, it is the virus. In a very hostile environment for Hungary. Hungary is, of course, equated with the Hungarian government and vice versa. This is a narrative frame that we have been familiar with for years. We know it very well. And this is, of course, the dominant narrative. But I think the real problem here is not necessarily just what narrative is dominant, but what information is accessible. And in this regard, the government has developed quite a controlled environment. Milan, you have mentioned the Hungarian media landscape, which is dominated by governmental interests, and the independent media has been functioning in an increasingly shrinking space. What we have been observing since the state of danger have been announced is an even more increasing restriction on this space. First of all, By now, I think we know about the amendment to the criminal code, which punishes with prison terms the spread of fake news in an attempt to fight misinformation. This amendment had put a lot of pressure on not only journalists, but also on their sources, who feel that this very flexibly defined legislation can endanger their freedoms. Furthermore, I mentioned that there is now even further restriction on access to public information, meaning that from 15 days now, the response time of public authorities has been increased to 45, which is incredibly long. And finally, we need to also mention the access to information directly from the government and from this operational unit that is currently in charge of dealing with the crisis. And here I would like to highlight that although there are daily pressers, these have been moved to the online space, and journalists have to submit their questions via email in advance. This resulted in a situation where the questions are cherry-picked by the officials, and a lot of questions of independent media outlets are not answered. In the current situation, of course, having online pressers is justifiable, but also there could be other ways to make sure that all questions are answered, and these are not.
We have to leave it there. Matthias, reactions in Brussels to Prime Minister Orbán ruling by decrees and what's happening in Hungary?
Yeah, I think it's worth to, as is always useful in Brussels, to go a little bit by the institutions. At that press conference last week, Commissioner Jourova, she said that what they're saying all the time, more than 20 of the EU member states have passed some kind of emergency COVID response law, so they're monitoring everything. And she said, I really wrote it down, when we read the law from Hungary, it does not raise the reason to start an infringement procedure yet. And what she always stresses is the yet, which is something when we talk about narratives, which the Fidesz media, Katalin Novak, which they always leave out. I mean, they take her quotes as kind of like, okay, Brussels gives us the salvation, everything is fine. But what Jourova is always saying, just okay, when the legal services look at the law, they say there's nothing we can do right now because Parliament could take it back. They are worried about that there's no sunset clause, this eternity thing, but of course legally they could take it back. So at the moment they don't see anything they can do. But of course they always stress that just like if you take a look at history and context, then of course we are extremely worried. This is something what von der Leyen has also said, because of course they all know about the power grip in Hungary, the infringement procedures have been going on, how the media has been weakened and all these things. So I think they pay close attention to it, but so far they could not do a lot. In the European Parliament, there it's not perceived as very convincing. People are pushing that quite a bit, especially Social Democrats and the Greens, but also some members of the European People's Party, so like the Christian Democrats. There are also more and more who say this is against the idea of rule of law and the European treaties. There was a resolution passed in April by the European Parliament with significant votes by some of the Christian Democrats. So there's something happening. But of course, if you look at
rumors about the suspension of Fidesz, which was prolonged, and there was a push of small parties of the EPP to expel Fidesz.
Yeah, I think this will remain kind of like a Twitter debate and a debate of open letters, because I mean, Tusk has come out very forcefully that he wants to have a decision, and I think he doesn't see a place for Fidesz in the EPP. But this can be only decided by a body of EPP, which is called the Political Assembly, which can only meet in person. They will not meet in June. I think now they want to meet in early September in Athens, Greece. And I think before mid-August, nothing will really be decided about that. And of course, the truth is that, because I kind of like have these two hats, I sometimes speak for the Brussels perspective, but of course also for the German perspective, I think as long as CDU and CSU have not decided how they want to how they want to go on, or whether they want to call for Fidesz to be kicked out. We are in this weird status where there's about 1/3, 40% of the delegates in the political assembly or of the member states, of the member parties, want Fidesz to be kicked out. It's interesting that now it's more the Spanish, the French, the Italian conservatives. They are fighting for Fidesz because they don't want to give the extreme right parties in their countries kind of like some political leeway, but I think a lot will be decided on by CDU-CSU in the end, and there's no real movement that I can see. But when we look at the member state, to go through the last of these institutions, it's quite obvious that you see a lot of criticism also publicly coming from what could be called the EU 15, kind of like the older member states until the Big Bang enlargement in 2004, with the only exception of Austria. But and of course now the UK is no longer on board, but the 13 other member states, they came out publicly against what's happening in Hungary. And the rest in Eastern and Central Europe, from my perspective, it's more that some of them are supportive, but I think most of them just stay silent because they feel they don't have a lot to gain from that. There are some who perceive it as this typical Eastern Europeans are still second-class members. They are treated differently. Nobody asked about what the Italians were doing when they did not follow the human rights law during the refugee crisis, all these things. So it's this weird bubble, and there's still enough member states with enough voting powers in the councils to have it on the agenda, to go on with the Article 7 procedures against Hungary and Poland, but it's kind of stuck. It's stuck somewhere. Like it's on the agenda. You can discuss about it, but it will not go to the end, and it will also not be stopped.
Last question before I open up about the EU budget. Of course, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, was tasked by the leaders at the last European Council to prepare a new budget. There will be conditionalities. Of course, the budget will be completely revamped to fight the pandemics and the economic repercussions. But there is an exception, that there is an expectation that somehow rule of law will be discussed as well, and there might be conditionality tied to it. What do you hear in Brussels?
Yes, I think there's consensus that some kind of conditionality.
You can wrap it up in 1 minute.
Will be part of the package. The question is just like how strict it will be, and just like and how you could turn it around if the Commission says member state X, you're not following the rule of law, and how you deal it with the budget. So something will be in there. The last proposal in February was quite a weak one, but I think it will be this monster bargain where you just don't know what will come out in the end. I mean, I think most of the Central European and Eastern European member states, I mean, they want to fight for the cohesion funds, that they will stay at the same level, that they will not all go to COVID recovery. So maybe there's a way to say, okay, if you want to get more of the cohesion funds, then you have to kind of like swallow the bitter pill of a better rule of law conditionality. But it's too early to predict. We don't know the numbers. The proposals that von der Leyen has to draft, it could come in a week, it could come in 2 weeks, but it will be a monster bargain. And I think what everybody knows, and is talking in Brussels as well, to solve that issue, you will need at least one physical meeting. It's impossible to do that via Zoom, as nice as it is to see all these friendly faces on my screen. But no, to fix MFF and everything related to that, you have to be in a building, you have to do the deals, you have to do the schmoozing, you have to do the arm twisting and all that stuff. So I think we will talk about that for weeks and months to come, I'm afraid. And you are unmuted. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Very, very, very good. Marina, please share with us the slide on the rates of deaths from coronavirus in European countries per million. So we can see where Hungary and Poland and the whole Central Eastern Europe is. There is a striking transcontinental divide. There was an article in Financial Times last week about it. So far, Spain has recorded 515 deaths per million people, Italy 453, Austria 65, and a huge contrast, Poland 16, Hungary 37 actually from the V4. Hungary still has the highest number, but it seems that not only the region has been lucky, and it has been the virus spread out later than to Western Europe, to Central Eastern Europe, but also governments have been very strict and careful with the lockdowns, and they acted early. Is this something that is also seen in Brussels, Matthias? Acknowledge, just one, two sentences.
Yeah,
please.
To be honest, I think it has not come up quite a bit. I think it's the Brussels focus is a lot on Italy, on France. Yeah, I think it has not been seen as just like a big achievement or something we can learn from. I think that's the same in Germany too. I think just like we have not looked when it comes about should we all wear masks. I think people don't look at Czech Republic or Slovakia where people have been wearing masks for a long time. But then we look at Taiwan and say like, oh, those East Asians, which I think also tells you a little bit about the German perception of, or just where we look at.
Very good. We have 20, thank you. We have 22 minutes for Q&A. And let me ask Marina to once again remind us how to ask your question or post a comment. You have to unmute yourself, Marina. Hello?
Milan, to ask the question, please use raise the hand button on your screen and wait until the chair addresses you. You also may write your questions into the chat. And for those who are watching us on YouTube, we invite you to ask your questions in the DGAP Twitter. We are encouraging you to have your video on while speaking, and please don't forget to unmute yourself.
Very good. So I'm looking for raised hands now. And Marina, please help me. There are two questions in the chat. The relationship, so from Francisco Branco, the relationship between the Hungarian government and European Union will be quite different after the pandemic. Well, that's a very general question. Zsuzsa, if you can take it briefly.
Yes, I think this crisis certainly heightened tensions. So I kind of see this as just exacerbating present processes. Something where I do feel a difference is the conflict between the ruling party, Fidesz, and the EPP leadership. I think with the EPP leadership, namely President Donald Tusk, the conflict entered also to very personal domains, and I see that beyond politics, this will be harder to roll back from, and this is a new quality of conflict that has been brought in.
We have a question from Lukasz Grajewski, German or correspondent of Polish press agency in Germany. Question to Matthias Kolb: what are the possible reactions of German government to holding the presidential elections in Poland in form of postal voting? Until now, only SPD politicians criticized the idea openly. Does the conservative camp, CDU-CSU, have another approach, or they are deliberately silent about it? So it's more question to you if you follow German politics from Brussels.
I think it's true that I haven't read or heard German or CDU, CSU politicians speak about it. I think that they would probably just wait about the outcome, that they don't feel that they have a lot to gain by speaking out and criticizing the Polish government. I think that's more kind of like my understanding, that I think German-Polish relations are also not in the best shape. So that I think, and that of course, I think Polish media follows a lot what German politicians are saying. And I think a lot of German politicians have also learned that just like lecturing or like, let's say, advice that they give in maybe in good spirit can often be perceived as lecturing and then doesn't really help a lot. So yeah, whether there's some kind of agenda or strategy behind it, I simply don't know.
What I can add is today the Polish-German reflection group between the two foreign ministries and departments of analysis and planning was taking place with a few representatives of think tanks. We were discussing EU issues, and this question was politely mentioned by German participants, but by think tankers, not by diplomats. Any other? So let's see, where are raised hands?
There's another question, I think, for me.
Oh,
if we want to
about Bavaria. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, and also
go ahead.
There's also a question about but I think you kind of answered that. Just like to sum it up, there's also a question whether like Polish politicians are trying to convince the Germans why they're doing that, and the other way around, whether there's some kind of like reaching across the aisle. I don't know exactly how that's happening in Berlin. I don't think that it's happening. I think in Brussels, my sense is that there was more like that the discussions are only in camps. So I think, of course, if there are the Polish Christian Democrats, like, I don't know, Mr. Sikorski, who talk a lot with their members of their political party, and then they explain it, or there are Polish Social Democrats who speak with Katarina Bale, who does a lot about Poland. But I think there's, and of course, there are, I think, 24 peace members of the European Parliament, but there's rarely a discussion happening that I feel. I think there's everybody's digging in their heels and just like, and they follow the narratives, and they don't have a sense that they're gaining something from reaching out and discussing and trying to convince it. At least my impression, it's just like, sadly, we are beyond this point where people feel like, hey, I could convince you of something else. So just like everybody just keeps on going. And the last question is about the fact that Bavaria held postal election during Corona. I think I had heard that, and I just know that the reaction from, I think, the Bavarian authorities was that it was just the what we call in Germany like the Stichwahl. It was kind of like the second round of election, where and before the candidates could campaign, it was on a local level, so people had a better knowledge of who was running, and that they felt it was okay to do that. And I think also the fact was mentioned that in Germany, voting by mail has been done for years and years, and it's becoming more and more popular. So that was also nothing new that has to be done, and the postal services were not it was not new to them, and back then in mid-March late March they worked quite well. But I think it's an interesting development, or like it's interesting to point out. That was something that I learned when I came to Brussels for the first time, that something that happens in Germany or in France or in Netherlands that is kind of tied or similar to what Western Europeans criticize about Poland or Hungary is always mentioned in the press, and then the Commission is asked to comment on certain things. For example, Polish correspondents often stress that it's the Bundestag who votes on the constitutional courts, and that political parties picking them. So just like, why is that so different from the Polish case where there's some political influence? But I think if I try to summarize what you're saying, is that Brussels is very polarized along the political families. Attention is elsewhere, and Poland is not much on the radar. I think it's kind of on the radar. It's just like it seems so difficult to do something. I think that's just like the big thing. Just like people follow, but what can you do? Adam Tracik has a question.
Yes, I have a question to Wojciech Szacki, which I think is quite important when you look at the Polish political scene right now. It's actually for the first time until now, Polish United Right or the peace camp was in most of the cases very united. It was like one fist actually, and differences were managed. So it was inside of the camp. And right now we see for the first time very, very important cracks, major cracks within the governing coalition. So what is your take on the future of the government right now, despite if the election actually goes on or not? So will the coalition hold on? Are we looking at new parliamentary elections? Is there going to be a minority government? What is going on the ground in the ruling camp?
Well, that's a very good question. Thank you. Jarosław Kaczyński, I guess his power is the weakest since 2015, since he came to power. He has, for 5 years, he hasn't been troubled by any voting in the parliament. The majority was rock solid, and nothing seemed to hurt him. As you mentioned, there are serious cracks in the United Right, and I think, and still there is a huge gap between this, these problems in the parliament and the social sentiment. If a parliamentary election were held today, I guess PiS would be the winner with, again, majority, and even perhaps bigger majority than it was in the autumn. So Jarosław Kaczyński might be tempted to organize early parliamentary election in August, let's say. Perhaps it's one of the ways to get rid of Gowin's party. Perhaps the civic platform would be very weak in this elections campaign. So the opposition on the whole would be either not ready for it or very, very weak. So yes, I think it might end up in the early parliamentary election in early autumn or late summer. And this
also as a postal or combined, or is this a big test for even parliamentary elections? What will be happening in the next few weeks?
They will have to create some legislation for this election. I don't know what will happen, but we will know more certainly after Thursday. If Kaczyński loses this voting in the same on the postal voting, he might actually think of early parliamentary election.
If I may, I'll connect this to a question from Alicia Polakiewicz. Do you think we should connect the crisis of judicially independence in Poland and the presidential elections more? In the end, the Polish Supreme Court decides about the legitimacy of the election.
Well, yes, of course, PiS has already taken control of the Constitutional Tribunal, and nothing wrong could happen to the United Right on this side. But still, the Supreme Court has to say whether the presidential election is valid, and it is very important. It's crucial for the ruling party to have it under its control before the presidential election. And I think this will happen. I mean, there will be new first chairman of the Supreme Court nominated in the coming days before the presidential election, and he will make sure that everything that PiS wants will be done by the Supreme Court. I know how it comes to you.
What are other institutions supposed to do, or what is their mandate, like the OSCE and their election monitoring mission? Who else than the European institutions would have a say? Wojciech.
Well, at the end of the day, I guess the civilized world would have to come to terms with Andrzej Duda elected. It might be some there might be some gestures some perhaps protests in the media, but in the end, I think leaders of the West would have to come to terms with Mr. Duda being elected. And I don't believe in any serious troubles from the Western world.
If we switch now to economic impact of the pandemic, of the corona crisis, there is a question from Natalie. Go ahead. And again, Natalie, if I may, I invite you to ask the question via video yourself.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for this discussion. Very interesting. My question, maybe you're reading it on the chat, but it's about what are your thoughts about how Hungary and Poland will be dealing with the massive economic recession that we are likely to see and perhaps already seeing across Europe as a result of this pandemic. You know, I remember that after the Eurozone crisis, Poland had done pretty well, you know, at least it was seen that way. This is a different picture, and also if you know, if there is a recession, and a country like Hungary is a place where there's a lot of German investments, German business, you know, how do you anticipate, how do you see the governments anticipating this huge economic downturn? And I know it's hard to predict, but what are your thoughts about the political fallout? Thanks.
Let's start, perhaps we can start with you, Zsuzsa.
Sure. So one thing that the empowerment will also make possible for the government is to address economic questions. And indeed, it has put together an economic recovery package in the past weeks, which has been also criticized for not being actually as broad and generous as it is being portrayed. Hungary will most likely be seriously hit by unemployment. There have already been several serious waves of people being let go. But one thing that has not really been considered is to address this situation by, for example, prolonging support for people who are unemployed. The Hungarian government insists on maintaining just this 3-month unemployment period. This will probably really hurt a lot of families financially and existentially. Another issue that seems to come to mind for me is that the Hungarian economy is really dependent. It's a very open economy, so it's not gonna get away from the crisis probably as easily as a decade ago. It is strongly dependent on the German economy, and its recovery measures will also depend on how the economies of Europe pull itself together. If you look at financial situation in the past month or two, the forint has also been significantly losing value, which as far as I know, however, is a regional phenomenon, but not having the euro in this current situation is actually something that could financially, economically backfire in the long run.
Wojciech?
Briefly, the economic situation is, I guess, one of the reasons why Jarosław Kaczyński is so determined to organize the presidential election in May. I guess right now people in Poland are still quite optimistic about the economic perspective. They don't believe that the crisis will hit them. What we, I mean, experts and politicians know for sure that there will be a recession, is not yet known to a general public. General public also is fed by the public media, which say that the Polish government will do its best to help people, to help the economy, and everything will be fine. We will still have all the social programs, benefits, and so on and so on. So basically, recession in Poland is expected, but not widely enough, and it hasn't have hit in Poland yet. So it's one of the reasons that PiS and Andrzej Duda are still so popular with people in Poland. And
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Wojciech, to include Matthias, we have 2 minutes left. Matthias, in economic terms, both Hungary and Poland are not part of the Eurozone, so their main reliance on the EU help financially will be on EU budget. To answer Natalie's question, what is their perspective then from, and what do you hear in discussions before the budget negotiations?
I think it's a little bit like it's what I heard a lot, although as I said before, economy is not kind of like my main beat, is I think that just the Hungary and Poland, the Baltic states, other Visegrad countries, I think they will fight a lot to have a lot of cohesion money coming to their respective regions over the next 7 years. And I think they might really be, I think they're really afraid that just like some people or some other member states might try to take all their cohesion money or other of the billions that Brussels like to spread across the region just to the COVID funds, and then they might end up in Italy or in France or in Spain. And I think what they stress, and I think kind of rightly so to a certain degree, it's just like the EU has committed itself to convergence, to try to bring the living standards and the levels of wealth and prosperity to a similar end. And I think COVID might be a symmetric crisis right now, but of course the consequences will be very asymmetric. So I think it's and also very challenging.
The EU rescue, if I may, the EU rescue will be asymmetric towards the Central Eastern Europeans because part of the region is in the Eurozone.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just like that will be very, very hard kind of like to square that, or just like to address all the challenges. And so I think it's a tough job for the Commission people, for President Charles Michel, who has to organize this. But I think, of course, a lot will also fall on the German diplomats who will take over the presidency 1st of July. And I think a lot of heavy lifting will have to be done by them, which I think you can say maybe it's good that it's the biggest country who has to do this gigantic task, because probably it would be hard for the Croatians to do something like that. But of course, that will be it will be challenging to find a balance of making everyone maybe not happy, but at least satisfied.
Our time is up. Thank you very much to Matthias Kolb in Brussels, Wojciech Szacki in Warsaw, and Zsuzsanna Vegh in Berlin for being our speakers. Thank you to my team, Marina Sonceva, Adam Tracik, and others for making this possible. And thank you to Polityka Insight for co-hosting this. If you are interested, from DGAP, we are continuing with our online video discussions. Tomorrow, our web talk starts at 2 p.m. on Russia and response to COVID and what does it mean to Putin system. Thank you very much and have a good day. Stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.